Hello and welcome. You're watching the Daily Report for Wednesday, November 9th. I'm Min Sanhee. Inflationary concerns persist as consumer demands are being met by supply shortages amid disruptions in logistics and more. We take a look at these concerns later on the program. Here first are the global pandemic updates. I have Kwon Soa standing by. Soa.
Sunny, maybe a little different from many people may have expected. We are seeing a decline in COVID-19 cases this Tuesday. It may be temporary, but as of now, the figure stands at 1,715 as of 12 a.m. And that includes a little less than 1,700 domestic transmissions. And let's take a closer look at where the new cases occurred. We're seeing a drop here in both the capitals, Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province, to the 600s and 500s respectively, but an increase to the triple digits in Incheon, and in the rest of the country, mainly double-digit figures of daily increases. Now, if we go over to our graph, as I said, there is a slight decline from yesterday, but if we compare this figure to last Tuesday, it is still an on-week increase. Let's move over to the general figures here. The total number of accumulated cases here in the country stands at 383,407. Unfortunately, we are seeing double-digit numbers of fatalities recently. 18 has brought the total number to 2,998. And if we go over to the number of patients that are currently in severe or critical condition, that stands at 425, and that is an increase from the past few days. Let's move over to our vaccination updates here. 81.1% of the nation's population has received at least one COVID-19 jab, and 76.9% are fully vaccinated. Going over to the figures abroad, there's been a rise in daily infections as of noon Korea time, more than 428,300 with over 6,400 new fatalities. And there's especially been a resurgence in many European countries, especially here in Germany, here at 4.8 million. We'll talk a little bit more about the fourth wave here in this country. Also, Russia still dealing with increasing figures at 8.8 million. Almost 40,000 cases were reported there in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
Right, so thank you for now for those figures. Right, back on the local front. In recent days, we've been talking about the unsettling jump in both the number of seriously ill patients and that of COVID-19 related fatalities. Now, for more of this grim reality, I have Shin Yeun here in the studio. Yeun, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Right now, Yeun, let's begin with the actual numbers then.
Right, for starters, as of this Tuesday, there were 425 patients in serious or critical condition, the highest figure reported in 74 days. And this is part of a concerning upward trend that health authorities have been noting. Just last week, the average daily number of people in critical condition rose by up to 8.8% compared to the week before. The number of deaths also jumped by 32.5% in a week.
Right. Now, Yeun, was this upward trend an expected scenario? And more importantly, is our medical capacity stable right now?
Right, as a matter of fact, it is, and authorities did expect to see this number go up. They specifically identified today and Wednesday as key dates that could lend us hints on how much the virus may have spread over the past 2 weekends. If you recall, many people gathered during Halloween and also this past Saturday and Sunday, which was the first weekend of eased restrictions on social gatherings and business operations. Given these variables in play, Korean health authorities did foresee an uptick in cases, but were they prepared? On Monday, health officials reassured the public that Korea's healthcare system was well equipped to handle any surge in cases. Take a listen.
Though we've seen the number of critically ill patients and especially deaths go up the past week, we currently have the medical capability to bring this number down. Nearly half of all our hospital beds are empty. To further strengthen each region's medical response, we're finding ways to activate treatment from home.
While they might have had enough hospital beds at the moment, authorities did caution that their healthcare system could be strained if the number of critically ill patients and deaths do not go down.
Right, and so in response, authorities are calling on members of the public to do their part to prevent infection, that is.
Right. Health authorities said everyone needs to work together to bringing these numbers down, and saying that failure to do so could really bring dire consequences. Take a listen.
If virus prevention measures aren't strictly kept, we might experience a resurgence in cases like some other countries that have attempted COVID-19 exit strategies. In order for us to safely transition to normal life, everyone needs to participate.
As you just heard, health authorities still remain firm in their commitment to a gradual return to normal despite these latest challenges. The Education Ministry also echoed this stance, saying even if the situation worsens dramatically, they'll hold the National College Entrance Exam on the third Thursday of November as usual. This year, that day falls on November 18th.
Right, November 18th. Now, Yen, let's turn to some bright news. I hear efforts are underway to boost travel within the country.
You're absolutely right. Amid higher vaccination rates and eased prevention rules, the government is helping the travel industry spread its wings once more. On Tuesday, the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism launched a major discount program for travelers planning to travel to different parts of the country. And every citizen can actually receive a one-time discount coupon for transport, accommodation, or travel packages, which they can only use once. There are more than 500 different travel packages they can choose from, such as a luxury food tour with a local around Gyeonggi-do province, a history trip in Chungcheongnam-do province, or a trip to Gangwon-do with your pet. And we're talking about major discounts. Each person can save up to 40% using these vouchers, which are available at tourvis.com or Naver. And authorities have also decided to allow the disabled or people of national merit to go on these trips free of charge. This program is set to wrap up on December 19th, so do check it out if you're planning to go anywhere soon.
Right, now, Yeon, these travel treats, of course, come in line with our transition into a new normal, which for other countries it's prompted a further opening of national borders, right, Swa?
Right, Sunny. So a travel ban ended in the U.S. on Monday local time, and also since a week ago, it's been a week now that Thailand has reopened travel to over 60 countries. Now, while Korea is offering those domestic travel opportunities that Yeon mentioned, traveling abroad has been very much discouraged throughout the pandemic here in Korea. And that actually even led to a closure of travel agencies, more than 1,300 according to the Korea Tourism Association. And that is down by 6.1% compared to September in 2019.
Right, though while many travel agencies have shut down, people here in Korea are trying their own different ways to enjoy their time off. We've actually seen a jump in outdoor camping sites. The number of camping sites as of September 2020 was around 2,804, and that was a 447 jump from the same time in September of 2019.
Right, and medical experts have been saying it's important to be outdoors, not confined indoors during the winter, of course. Meanwhile, so the border openings overseas are offering Koreans greater opportunities to fly out.
Right, Sunny. So as I mentioned, Thailand has reopened travel from 63 countries on November 1st. So from the 1st of November until the 7th, over 20,000 people arrived through international flights, according to a government briefing there yesterday. And that's 22,832. And out of those, there were 20 people confirmed with COVID-19, which is equivalent to 0.1%. Now, meanwhile, 987 South Koreans have traveled to Thailand through that span. With that, Koreans accounted for the 5th highest number of foreigners that have made their visit to Thailand ever since that reopening. Now, in the U.S., meanwhile, November 8th was a day of emotional reunions. It was the day when a ban on international arrivals from 33 countries was lifted for vaccinated travelers. Those include China, India, South Africa, Brazil, most of Europe, and even overland travel from Mexico and Canada. The travel ban was imposed by the Trump administration in January 2020, starting with non-U.S. citizens traveling from China, and were gradually extended and in place for over a year and a half, not only denting the tourism industry, but separating families and friends for many months.
She literally left. She left the day that COVID started.
Literally.
And she had to take a mask to get on the flight to go back, and then she hasn't been back since.
I just can't wait to see everyone, my friends. I missed weddings. I missed my friend's birth. so many moments that we're supposed to cherish with our loved ones, and we all missed it. So I hope that we are on the right path and that things will get better. And
Right, she sounds quite happy. So what are the entry protocols for Koreans seeking to travel to the US?
Good that you asked, Sunny. Koreans have to follow the same rules as these other countries, meaning a vaccine pass and a negative test result. But earlier, Korea only had to have a negative test result, so we have to get vaccinated to enter the US.
Right. Meanwhile, so I believe border curbs may be tightened over in Germany amid an alarming rebound in daily infections. Tell us more.
Right, Sunny. Germany's infection rate has hit an all-time high since the pandemic broke out. According to local data on Monday, the 7-day incidence rate, which represents the number of infected people per 100,000, increased to 200.1, surpassing the previous record of 197.6 back in December last year. With its healthcare system being pushed to the limits, German doctors are now suggesting the need to postpone other schedules such as operations in the coming weeks. A slowdown in vaccinations has been blamed for triggering the fourth wave in the European country, with 67% of the nation's population fully vaccinated at the present time.
Clearly, we are dealing with a situation which was above all provoked by those who have actively and voluntarily not been vaccinated.
So to tackle this problem, lawmakers in Germany are now putting their heads together to make new adjustments regarding vaccination, but also regarding testings. So let's take a listen.
Free
coronavirus tests are a tool to break up infection chains early on and to identify outbreaks early. That's why it was a mistake to abolish them, and we want them reinstalled.
So free testing is likely, and reintroductions of social distancing measures are also likely to be set up with Germany's upcoming new government, and also with a parliament meeting to be held this Thursday to further discuss the matter.
Right. Now, Germany is among the countries that adopted an early exit strategy, well, earlier than Korea, that is. Yeon, what do you suppose are some things that can be learned from its early experience?
Right, definitely it's worth noting what's happening in Germany, because authorities here in Korea said if we don't bring the numbers of critically ill patients and deaths down, we might also become these countries like Germany that's actually been faster in easing such regulations. And one similarity worth noting between Korea and Germany's case is that most of the new patients are unvaccinated. But one critical difference, though, is that Korea has a higher vaccination rate. We're nearing 80%, with the number going up every month. But for Germany, it's been months since the vaccination rate seemingly plateaued at the 60% range.
Right, so it really looks like more and more Germans are reluctant to get vaccinated. But that's also actually why there have been discussions on whether to make vaccination mandatory. But at this point, this seems to be a highly controversial issue, which is why the lawmakers that I mentioned earlier are probably rather go towards more COVID-19 testing instead of making vaccine mandatory. But it's not only Germany, but many other European countries that are struggling with the same issue. For instance, Bulgaria and Romania, which have the lowest vaccination rates among the EU, the lowest and the second lowest, Bulgaria and Romania, respectively. And also Greece is likely to face new restrictions. The unvaccinated population there is likely to face new restrictions as daily infections have been reaching record highs recently again.
I see. All right, so thank you for those updates. And Yeon, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
In our headlines at this hour, President Moon Jae-in has addressed the current severe shortage in diesel exhaust fluid here in the country, vowing to tackle the matter using all possible channels. Our Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji files this report.
President Moon Jae-in says the government will deploy all its diplomatic capacity to secure urea supplies from overseas. Speaking at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Moon urged the public not to be overly concerned. The president's remarks came a day after he instructed officials to mobilize all possible measures to stabilize the supply of the diesel exhaust fluid.
정부는 외교 역량을 총동원해 해외 물량 확보에 총력을 기울이고 있습니다. 급한 곳은 공공부문 여유분을 우선 활용하고 긴급 수급 조정 조치 등으로 수급 안정화에 만전을 기할 것입니다.
Moon highlighted the need to find new importers while saying there needs to be an extensive review of raw material supply in line with changes in the global supply chain. South Korea has been grappling with a price surge in urea water solution amid a shortage in supply. This after China stepped up export curbs on certain raw materials, including urea, to secure supplies domestically. South Korea depends on China for about 97% of its imports. In regards to COVID-19, Moon vowed to do his best for a complete recovery from the pandemic, so that South Korea does not backstep during the final 6 months of his term. The country has eased distancing restrictions for a gradual return to normal, with more than 70% of the population fully vaccinated.
하지만 우리는 뒷걸음질 치는 일 없이 완전한 일상 회복으로 나아갈 수 있도록 정부가 상황 관리에 최선을 다하겠습니다. 코로나와 공존하는 이전과는 전혀 다른 일상입니다. 어떤 경우에도 기본적인 방역 수칙을 철저히 준수해야 하고 백신 접종의 필요성도 더욱 중요해지고 있습니다.
On his recent European tour, which took him to Rome for the G20 summit, Glasgow for the UN Climate Change Conference, and Budapest for a state visit, Moon said it proved South Korea's raised status on the global stage and reaffirmed support for peace on the Korean peninsula. The president added that the government will work to raise people's quality of life accordingly and to step up its role as an advanced nation in the Great Transition period. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And now, for a better glimpse of the repercussions in light of the shortage in this emissions control fluid essential for diesel cars, our Kim Sung-min was out on the streets of Seoul.
Right now in South Korea, it's not hard to find gas stations with a sign saying urea water solution out of stock. This clear liquid, also called diesel exhaust fluid, reduces pollution from diesel, but practically, diesel vehicles these days can't operate without it. And this once cheap and easy to obtain fluid has become extremely scarce all across South Korea.
None. We have none in stock. We received a little last Monday, but it was all gone that day. And it's killing me. Some customers think that gas stations are stockpiling it, but I'm sure almost all the stations in Seoul couldn't secure it.
Those biggest hit are diesel trucks, as they need much more of the fluid, around 10 liters for every 300 to 400 kilometers. And considering around 60% of the 3 million diesel trucks in the country require the fluid to operate, the shortage could halt distribution chains across the country.
This is one of the biggest truck terminals in Seoul, a base for hundreds of delivery trucks. I'm here to find out exactly how this shortage will impact drivers, and in turn, how it'll affect consumers.
Hong Yi-sang, a truck driver who delivers new cars, worries that the shortage will soon halt his deliveries entirely.
2 days ride. I think I'll have to stop the truck in 2 days with the current amount I have. I just talked to another driver in Andong. He also asked me if I have some left.
Experts worry that the prolonged shortage will have knock-on effects across many industrial sectors, affecting not only consumers, but also the automobile and construction sectors, which require the fluid. The shortage is because China, the main exporter of urea water solution, cut its exports to South Korea. China's trade dispute with Australia has led to a bottleneck of coal, which is essential in producing urea water solution.
The dependency was too strong. 97%, so basically 100%, came from China. And as they cut exports, South Korea could not immediately diversify its import channels.
President Moon Jae-in on Monday ordered the utmost efforts to stabilize the supply of urea water solution. That includes importing some 27,000 liters of urea water solution from Australia, as well as some 200 tons of urea from Vietnam. But this won't be enough to end the shortage. Also starting Monday until the end of the year, the hoarding of urea will be banned. Sellers reserved more than 10% above their monthly average sales last year will face a fine of up to $85,000 or be imprisoned for up to 3 years. Experts say the government should put all efforts into weathering the storm for the next 2 to 3 months while also coming up with long-term plans like encouraging domestic production.
Countries like Russia are making urea water solution, but it will take around 2 to 3 months to secure supplies. And to produce it locally, profitability has to be ensured, so the government can maybe give incentives to a few firms to produce the material.
He also added the urea water solution shortage shows the importance of diversifying import channels in advance for all key materials. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea's two major chipmakers have just handed in over information, that is, that the US claims would boost industry transparency. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more on what this means.
Following a request from the U.S. to global chipmakers for semiconductor data to help them grapple with a crippling chip shortage, two of South Korea's major chipmakers did so on Tuesday. Amid an ongoing chip shortage, the U.S. Commerce Department in September had asked chip companies to fill out questionnaires comprised of 26 topics such as the company's inventories and backlogs, setting a deadline of November 8th local time. Though it said the sharing of information is voluntary, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo in September said the U.S. might use compulsory measures to get the data if needed. The reason for the data request was said to be in order to boost supply chain transparency and identify where bottlenecks are, but the appeal for data triggered industry concerns over chipmakers' own trade secrets. TSMC, a major contract chipmaker, is among several companies to have supplied Washington with data, yet they said on Monday that no detailed information on clients was disclosed. The world's two biggest makers of memory chips, South Korea's Samsung Electronics and SK hynix, also filed a response to the U.S.'s request on Tuesday morning, but as widely expected, have left out detailed information. Samsung omitted sensitive information including client information and inventories, labeling them confidential and not open to the public. SK hynix too excluded crucial corporate secrets and shared inventory data with sector information rather than details on specific products. According to experts, such measures are not a long-term solution to the current supply chain crisis, an issue that could only be addressed by increased production by shifting manufacturing of chips to the U.S.
It takes $10 to $15 billion and several years to put up a new semiconductor fab. Companies make such decisions based on demand, technology, profitability, payback period, and risk. No company would change its decision just because the US government starts probing for more information.
For companies, such measures are a deterrent for shifting production bases and solving shortage problems, the expert added. Meanwhile, Industry Minister Moon Sung-wook is scheduled to meet Raimondo during his visit to Washington, D.C. to discuss the chip supply chain issues. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a recent report by the Washington Post paints a rather discouraging portrait of the globe's pledged efforts to tackle climate change. Kim Hyo-sun explains.
As criticism mounts over the lack of substantial progress at the UN Climate Summit, the Washington Post is reporting that the emission reduction pledges made by countries were built on flawed data. It says a team of experts have looked into reports submitted by 196 countries. The investigation, it says, found many had undercounted their greenhouse gas emissions. It adds there was an enormous gap ranging from at least 8.5 billion to as high as 13.3 billion tons a year of underreported emissions. For instance, the data submitted to the UN by Malaysia shows the country's annual emissions at just 81 million tons, less than Belgium, due to its forests and jungles that consume vast amounts of CO2. However, data compiled by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization indicates Malaysia actually released 422 million tons of greenhouse gases in 2016, placing it among the world's top 25 emitters. The Washington Post also found that methane emissions make up a second major portion of missing greenhouse gases in the UN database. It It adds that countries are undercounting methane emissions of all kinds, ranging from the oil and gas sector to agriculture and human waste. Moreover, the report points out there are fundamental problems that lead to the gap, noting how developed countries have one set of standards, while developing nations have another. It also says some 45 countries, including Algeria and Libya, have not reported any new greenhouse gas numbers since 2009. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
It's that time of the week again when we share with you some of the leading stories in the tech sector. Facebook has rebranded itself with a new name, Meta, seeking to go beyond its role as a social networking site. I have Abby Lee with me to tell us more about Meta's virtual race against Microsoft. It's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Sunny. So in today's segment, we'll talk about how the two companies' plans and progress stack up so far against each other. But before we get into that, let's hear from the firm's top executives. Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, is trying to temper the hype around the metaverse.
We're all talking about the metaverse as if we're entering some new dimension. This is not like dying and going to heaven. We're all going to be living in the real world with people.
Smith was speaking on the sidelines of Lisbon's Web Summit recently and added there will be different metaverse platforms by respective companies. We'll talk about a concept called interoperability in a bit.
What you're going to see is there's Facebook's version of the metaverse. There's Microsoft's version of the metaverse. There will be Apple's version of the metaverse. There will be Google's version of the metaverse. Everyone is going to be entering this.
Right then. Let's first then touch upon Facebook's new name, Meta.
That's right. So as you mentioned, Facebook has a new name, and that's to highlight its focus on building the metaverse. The word is a portmanteau of meta, which means beyond, and universe. It refers to a collective virtual shared space that combines virtual worlds, augmented reality, and the internet. Speaking at the company's online conference, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said the new name reflected its work investing in the metaverse rather than its namesake social media service. Let's hear from Zuckerberg and a marketing specialist on the name change.
To reflect who we are and what we hope to build, I am proud to announce that starting today, our company is now Meta.
The Facebook brand and the Mark Zuckerberg brand are one. So he is the person who wanted to use this as a platform to tell people about pay no attention to what's going on at Facebook. That's just a small business. I want to talk to you about the future, and I want to tell you how we're going to capture the future. And it's a really tricky time to try to do that.
The branding specialist was referring to criticism by lawmakers and regulators over Facebook's algorithm decisions and the policing of abuses on the social media network.
Hence the really tricky time that he mentioned.
That's right.
Meanwhile, what are some of the similarities and main difference between Meta and Microsoft?
So both companies said users would be able to create avatars or the animated versions of themselves that would move freely between different virtual worlds. For workers, that means attending meetings, hanging out with colleagues, or visiting digital twins of real-world offices and factories. But details of this vision have yet to be spelled out, with the most important being the technical foundations to make it all happen. The firms also need to agree on the terms on which the new metaverses will allow access to avatars that were created elsewhere. This is where interoperability comes in. It refers to a characteristic of a product or system whose interfaces are completely understood to work with other products or systems at present or in the future in either implementation or access without any restrictions. Now, as a first step, Microsoft said users of its proprietary business communication platform called Teams would be able to start appearing as avatars in online meetings in the first half of next year. Facebook, on the other hand, has vaulted straight to virtual reality with an open beta of Horizon Workrooms. It's a free app designed to allow employees to work together in a virtual office via Oculus headsets.
Right. So, Ji, at present, which platform appears closer to what experts would imagine to be completed versions?
So if we have to choose between the two, I would say Microsoft. It is a more gradualist approach and also boasts more users. Some 250 million people use Teams at least once a month, compared to just 7 million paying users for Facebook's software. And before I go, Sunny, I have to mention that Arirang is actually very much active and present on Metaverse. On Korea's homegrown platform Zepeto, developed by Naver, you can visit Arirang town to check out our radio and TV stations like this one that we're in. That's all for me today.
All right, Ji, as always, thank you very much for the coverage.
Thanks for having me.
Concerns over inflation are mounting amid disruptions in global supply chains. For more on the economic front, that is, as we learn to live with COVID-19, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Welcome back, Professor Song.
Thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Kim Se-wan from Ewha Women's University. It's good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Song, Korea's Consumer Price Index surged to 3.2% on year back in October, the highest since January 2012, I believe. What are your prospects for the months ahead?
Actually, I believe I'm still in the transitory team, so which means that the current situation of inflation is because of the disruption of supply chain, so which by nature, which is temporary and transitory. But whether how long it will take, but less than 2 years would be most likely. So when I look around the current situation in Germany, they have experienced 4.4% of inflation rate in October, which is just 28 years ago, which was 4.3 percentage points. And in France and in Britain, they have a food shortage and some boiler system problems. But when I compare the data, particularly in Korea, it was comparable period of inflation, particularly the producer price index and CPI, excluding the energy and food price. That is in the aftermath of a great financial crisis in between the 2009 and 2010. The inflation rate was almost 4%, which is comparable to current inflation rate. Therefore, soon it will disappear, and I think current situation is very similar. When we look back the history, this is very close to the situation in 1950 when the Korean War broke out. Then United States has experienced a surge of inflation, then it faded out within 2 years. So I think that is comparable era, and I do not have much of concern about the inflation.
Right, so for Professor Song, in your view, it's just a phase that we will weather out.
Right.
And Professor Kim, what are your thoughts now on the causes behind rising consumer prices?
There are two forces that drives up price level. One is demand side, and the other is supply side. And these days, these two forces together boost up domestic inflation, which becomes almost perfect situation of the inflation. A global supply chain, as Professor Song talked about, and soaring raw material prices, particularly in oil price and coal prices, are external factors of higher inflation. Oil price is really skyrocketing from last year. The price of the international crude oil was $30 per barrel in March of last year, but it is over $80 per barrel, increase over 260%. At the same time, from inside of the country, the demand for goods and services are increasing quickly, represented by 4% economic growth. And at the same time, really enough liquidity has been provided to save the economy in the past 2 years. And lastly, rising 전세 prices and housing prices is another major factor of inflation.
Right here in the country, of course.
Right.
Professor Song, topping national headlines in recent days is the shortage of diesel exhaust fluid. What are your thoughts on this and on the broader implications of this shortage?
I think this is not related with the inflation issue because of a sudden disruption of supply, particularly the import from China has been disrupted because Chinese government has banned on the export of these urea, which is carbamide, so organic compound, but it's very essential for particularly for the fertilizer. So that's why the Chinese government has banned on so this cannot be resolved soon. So we have to find some diverse and various supply of these urea solution, so which is essential to reduce the pollutants, particularly from the nitrogen and the nitrogen oxygen from the exhaust from the diesel engine. However, still this could have some impact on the economy. But however, this is could be resolved not soon. But this shows us some kind of danger when we have some totally offshoring, some supply from foreign countries could be a obstacle and could have a damaging effect on the economy, particularly even though it is a temporary disruption. So we have to change, and we must have the government should take care of this situation, and then long-term strategy to avoid this kind of disruption in the future.
Right. And Professor Kim, to ease inflationary pressure, authorities are poised to cut taxes on fuels by 20% starting this coming Friday for the next 6 months. And as you mentioned earlier, consumer coupons are being handed out to spur spending. How do these measures look to affect economic recovery while seeking to stabilize prices?
Well, with current packages of policies between stabilizing inflation and recovering economy, it won't be easy to stabilize inflation in the short run. As we talked about, one of the most influential factors of high inflation is oil price, and when we pay for gas, 50% is tax. So, for example, when we pay like 10,000 won for gas, 5,000 is tax. So it was timely action of the government to adjust fuel taxes for stabilizing oil products prices. However, it is highly expected that oil price goes up for a longer term, and quite a few major prices has been increased, like transportation prices and agricultural prices and electricity prices. So I think the current package of government policies to stabilize inflation is not strong enough to stabilize inflation in the short run.
Right. And now for a broader understanding of current inflationary concerns, we turn to the US, where a recent consumer survey by the Federal Reserve showed inflation prospects hitting a fresh high for the coming year. For more, I have Professor Robert Deckel at the University of Southern California live on the line. Professor Deckel, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for putting me on your show.
Right. Professor, do start by sharing with us details of the central bank's October survey of consumer expectations and a bit about the reasons behind them.
I see. So this survey was performed by the Federal Reserve of New York, and it's an internet survey of 1,300 or so households or consumers, and they give their impressions of what the inflation rate is going to be a year and also in 3 years. And those are higher. Those are quite high. I mean, the short run, it's 5.5. In 3 years, it's 4% or so. So those are pretty high expected inflation figures. And it's highly concerning, because what the Fed didn't want, Fed in Washington didn't want, and what economists like us don't want, is that inflationary expectations of households get embedded into the system. Because if you think that inflation, say, is going to be averaging, say, 4%, okay, it's a little bit even lower than this Fed survey, then people will, like small businesses will raise their prices by 6%. Wage earners would demand 6% increases because they say that prices are going to increase by 4%. I have to, so everyone's going to be raising prices because they expect prices to go up, and that gets kind of embedded into the system. And if these expected prices get very rigid, it's going to be very hard to bring down the inflation rate unless you have a sharp recession. And so overall, it's quite concerning, and it's quite concerning that these survey numbers are quite high. So that's my take on these recent consumer surveys. Yeah,
Professor Deckel,
it's very worrisome.
Right, it is, of course. There's been a bit of talk also about the term transitory that the Federal Reserve has earlier used to describe the current U.S. inflation. How do you respond, Professor?
So as the two gentlemen spoke about the Korean situation, the transitory part is the same. Supply chain disruptions. In the U.S., there's workers aren't going back to work because the unemployment benefits were just very generous until early October. So you have a labor supply shortage. Oil prices, commodity prices have gone up. Shipping, it's because of COVID, shipping from Asia into the United States, Korea and China into the United States have been disrupted. The Suez Canal crisis has disrupted shipping. So for those reasons, yes, there are supply distortions, and those are transitory, but transitory of a year, maybe 2 years even. But what's even more concerning, so that's the supply side, and a gentleman just mentioned on your panel that there's also the demand side, and the demand side is more concerning because the Fed just keeps on printing money. And, this is, as Milton Friedman, who's a famous kind of monetary economist, has said, inflation everywhere is a monetary phenomenon. And the Fed has just only recently, like a few days ago, announced what's called tapering, or they're not buying as many government bonds. So finally, they've announced that money supply is going to be increasing at a slower pace, but it's than before, but it's still increasing, and that's a big concern. And so that's why households expect inflation rates to be 4% over the next 3 years. Even the 10-year inflation rate that you can calculate out of spreads between inflation-adjusted bonds and regular bonds lies at about 2.7% over the next 10 years. And that's almost never has been above 2% for quite a while. So even market participants, the investment community, think that the inflation rate over 5 to 10 years is going to be much higher than what it was before in the U.S. So these are quite concerning developments from my perspective and the perspective of many economists here.
Right. Professor Deckel, given what you've said so far, then, I am assuming you are then in support of the Fed's decision to begin tapering bond purchases later this month as part of efforts to pull its pandemic aid out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in support of that, and in fact, I think it was too late, but it's better late than never. But the pace is going to be really slow. There's tapering that's starting, and it might be well within June or so until the Fed buying of long-term bonds has is stopping, but it's still on their balance sheet. They're not getting rid of this stuff. They're just buying less, but they just still own these government bonds. And then only at that point will there be any consideration of raising the federal funds rate or the interest rate from nearly zero to 0.25. I think the market now thinks that there'll be 2 increases next year toward the end.
I see.
Quarter percent each. So it might, by December, it'd be 0.5%. December 2022. Right. So that seems to be the market expectation. But I mean, there's a lot of factors, that I think are behind the decision of the Fed.
Right.
To be very late in raising interest rates.
Right. Mm-hmm. And staying with that particular decision, Professor Song, what can you tell us about the wider implications of the Federal Reserve's tapering process, especially here on the local market?
I believe this tapering is, I agree with that. This is, even though Professor Deckel is better late than never, but actually during the outbreak and aftermath of the coronavirus outbreak, I think June is too early to start tapering. So I think this would be a proper time. But as for the long-term inflation rate, that would be embedded among the demand side consumers. That would be a problem. But I don't think, because according to the press release which was made on 3rd of November by the Federal Reserve, they have believed they allow the inflation rate higher than 2% average. So because unless it becomes some very high and long lasting, they will maintain the current interest rate. So that is the point. So the long-term inflation rate, even according to the calculation, that would be I think Federal Reserve board directors also believe that would be a temporary. And recently I have just checked Wall Street Journal and what happened to the Western Texas Intermediate oil price future. That has been stabilized around $80, and so because of that, I think as long as and also the Professor Deckel has mentioned the truck drivers will not return to what they used to have the job. So that is called great resignation. So which means that people now they become aware of how harsh their previous job was. That's because they do not want to go back. So that caused some shortage of the labor supply. So as time goes by, I think that will be resolved, and there's a disruption of the supply and the disruption of labor supply also will be resolved sooner or later. So,
right, hopefully.
Yeah.
Professor Deckel, very briefly speaking, the Fed's actual announcement on intentions to begin tapering came last Wednesday, and the announcement itself did not rattle the markets, with the US stocks finishing up actually. How do you explain this reaction from the market?
Well, it was less aggressive than perhaps what the market anticipated. Like when interest rates rise or money supply growth slows, the market's going to fall because interest rates and bonds become an alternative to stocks. So people start to move toward bonds and savings accounts and safer assets, right? So if the Fed starts raising interest rates and their tapering slows, then bond interest rates go up and people will shift their stocks to bonds. But since the tapering is quite gradual, bond interest rates didn't rise as much. It's still like 1.53. It's gone down a little. That's why people are still holding stocks and buying them. Also, with the inflationary expectations going up, the return you're getting on bonds is negative after you subtract the inflation. Also, bank accounts are not earning anything, so people are losing money, putting their money in just your savings account. So everyone is taking a little more risk than they should by going into the stock market. And so that's why it didn't go down. In fact, it's gone up the last week because the Fed was more dovish, softer than what people anticipated. Yeah.
Right, it was. All right, Professor Deckel, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this hour with your thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Right, well, Back here in the studio, Professor Kim, the Kospi, starting from early October for its part, has been hovering below the 3,000 mark. What can you share with us about the sentiment of the local stock market?
Well, I think the major difference between robust U.S. market and Korean market is on the differences on major companies' business performances. U.S. market, for example, notched its highest level as investors became happy with great earnings report of the major companies. But on the other side, in Korean market, we do not see impressive earnings report of major companies. In the case of the United States, U.S. investors are also worrying about the higher inflation and broken global supply chain, but they are pretty happy with major companies are getting over this difficult situation. But in Korea, we are worrying about the higher inflation also and higher possibility of raising interest rate by central banks. So our market, stock market is going under adjustment period, for example, for a while.
Right, and talking about central banks raising interest rates, Professor Song, what are your prospects for a further hike in our benchmark key interest rate later this month?
In Korea?
Yes.
I think many press and the people anticipate some rise of interest rate, but what I would like to say is be careful and not to put down on some recovery of the economy. Otherwise, already we have some problem with some supply disruption and other issues. So I believe this would be too early to raise the interest rate. So I believe according to Fed, actually, in the press release, they have set up some priority of concern of the Fed is public health, labor market, and the inflation rate and expected inflation and the financial and international market. But in Bank of Korea do not have such order of priority. So that creates some divergence and a different approach between the Fed and Bank of Korea when they look on some current economic situation. So I'd rather advise them not to raise the interest rate and wait until next time, because as early as January or February, we are going to see some indicator what happened to the oil price and how the supply chain disruption can be resolved. Then so that would not be it cannot be too late to raise interest.
So you would propose a wait and see approach.
Right.
All right, Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your insights. And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, seeking a balance appears to be key in ensuring stability and sustainability, whether it's about the health of the economy or the public amid the pandemic. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.